صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. Respected brothers, respected sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight or today we commemorate the martyrdom anniversary of our beloved ninth Imam, Muhammad Taqi al-Jawad alayhi salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the love and honor of this great Imam to grant us all the tawfiq to remain firm on the path of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the glorious reappearance of our beloved 12th Imam, Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu farajahu al-Sharif. Before we begin, let us recite a Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha for all of our marhumin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. والبراءة من أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله، صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله. غريب مظلوم كربلاء، ما خاب والله من تمسك بكم وأمنا من لجأ إلى حصنكم، وفاز من والاكم وسار بنهجكم. يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز فوزا عظيما. Although we are commemorating the martyrdom anniversary of our beloved ninth Imam, we will always remember his grandfather, our beloved Imam Al-Hussein. So let us send him our salam on this day. Let us direct our hearts to Karbala and say, As-salamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Once again. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Once again, respected brothers and respected sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In light of this anniversary of the martyrdom of our beloved ninth Imam, we will discuss a topic that we had promised to analyze and dissect as a continuation to previous topics. This is the second part of the topic on taqlid. In the first part, we discussed the importance of taqlid and why we emulate jurists in matters or in practical matters of Islamic law. In this topic, which is a continuation to the first topic, we are going to highlight a very important question that is often raised by some of the believers who live in the West. Do our maraja understand life in the West for them to issue edicts and rulings for us here living in the West? And this question is a valid question, but it implies that a marja is not qualified to issue edicts or rulings for people living in the West, alaykum assalam, unless they understand life in the West. So really the question that we have to first address, do our maraja need to understand life in the West in order to be qualified to issue edicts and rulings for Muslims living in the West? That is the question that we have to answer. Because if we answer this question as no, they do not need to understand life in the West, then that negates the importance of discussing the first question. So what is the question that we want to focus on? Does a marja need to understand life in the West in order to be qualified to issue edicts and rulings for Muslims who live in the West? To better understand or to better answer this important and vital question, I need to elaborate on three very important points. But I need your undivided attention, inshallah, for these points after a loud salawat. The first point is to differentiate between the subject and the ruling. I probably touched on this in the past, but it's important to remind because these points complete each other. Every point is built upon the previous point. What is the difference between the subject and between the ruling? The ruling is defined as the legislation issued by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to organize the affairs of humankind. And the rulings, the most prominent rulings that we know are the 5 types of rulings. The obligatoriness, which is the command to do, and you must do and must not leave, must not abandon. Prohibition, must not do. Detestability, karaha, better not to do. Recommendation, good to do, but you don't have to. And then permissibility, which is the freedom to leave, to do or not do. These are the 5 main types of rulings. And then we have other types of rulings that pertain to certain things. These 5 pertain to our actions. We have another type that pertains to things, but not our actions. For example, purity, impurity. Purity and impurity are not related directly to our actions. You can't describe an action as this is pure or impure. You describe something as pure or impure. This water has come into contact with urine. The ruling of that water is mutanajjis, it's impure. Now when we say it is impure, there's nothing that I need to do, the fact that it's impure. But if I wanted to drink that water, it would be forbidden, prohibition, prohibited to drink from that water. If I wanted to perform wudu with that water, it would be invalid, which is another ruling. Now, invalid is not a ruling of action. It just says that what you have done doesn't suffice. You need to do it again using pure water. So the rulings that are directly related to our actions are the 5. Wujub, obligation; hurma, prohibitions; karaha, detestability; istihbab, recommendation; and ibaha, permissibility. The rulings that pertain to things around us are, for example, purity, impurity; validity, invalidity; and so on and so forth. These are the rulings. What about the subject? The subject is that which the ruling applies to. That which the ruling applies to. For example, you have the subject of salah, prayer. What is the ruling on prayer in Islam? We say, what type of prayer are you referring to? There are different types of prayers. The night prayer, Salatul Layl. What is the ruling? The ruling of Salatul Layl is what? Mustahab, recommended. But what about Salatul Subh and the daily prayer? What is the ruling on that? Wajib. So the subject is Salatul Layl. The subject is Salatul Subh. The ruling is going to differ. Salatul Subh is wajib, Salatul Layl is mustahab. If I can have my respected brothers to come forward, please, after a loud salawat. Now we understand the first point, the difference between the subject and between the ruling. I can't go to the second point unless we fully comprehend the first point, the difference between the subject and between the ruling. The subject is something that the ruling applies to, and the ruling changes according to the change of subject. You bring a dead dog, that's a subject. Can you eat that dog? Of course not, it's impermissible. But you put that dog outside, near the sea, near salt, and as time goes by, it churns and transforms into salt. And you come again and you ask another question, can we eat that salt? Answer is yes, it's permissible. But the other day you said you can't. Well, because it was a dog, the subject has changed. When the subject changes, the ruling also changes. This is the first point. Point number 2, we need to understand that there are 3 major types of subjects, 3 different types of subjects. I summarized them into 3 for the sake of understanding and clarifying. They could be divided into 4, but I'd like to keep it at 3. The first of these types is a subject that is defined by Islamic law. A subject that me and you do not define or prescribe. Islam is responsible for defining that subject for us. For example, salah. Who made up this method of salah? Me, you, the marja? No. Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet to teach us to pray in this specific method. What about wudu? Can you do wudu in any way you like? No, there's a specific method of doing wudu. What about fasting? Can you fast in any month of the year? No, it's specific to the holy month of Ramadan. So these are prescribed subjects. The parameters, the method is all taken from Islam. Islam is responsible for identifying that subject for me, and you, of course, and all of us. The second type of subject is what we call a subject that is defined by common view. by urf. Islam doesn't get involved, alaykum assalam, defining that subject. For example, music that is, in Arabic, the word is not music, the word is ghina. In fact, a lot of people mix between these two things. There's a difference. Today, we may refer to the song as music or the actual instruments and the sounds of instruments as music. Irrespective, the term in Arabic that is used is ghina. Now, ghina, when you translate it literally, it translates to singing. But someone could argue, but not all singing is haram. So, some singing, some of our nasheed could be called singing. So then it becomes really a battle or a conflict of words. Ghina is a term that is used to any type of music that is played in a way, in a melody, in a tune that is suitable to gatherings of unlawful amusement. Who defines what ghina is? Islam says, I didn't make ghina to define it. Shaitan made ghina, so that's not my problem. I made salah, so I'll define it for you. But ghina, that's not my deal. So who identifies what ghina is? He says urf, common view. Whatever common view, the normal common view, regards as ghina. That is why when you go to a marja, no matter how learned they are, and you say, let me play this clip for you, assuming they allow you to play the clip, they can't help you. Say, I don't know. This marja has probably never in their life listened to ghina. So they don't know what it's like. They tell you, go to a common view. Ask the guy that sells CDs on the street or the people that listen to these things. But me, I can't tell you. So this subject of ghina is a subject that is defined by common view, by urf, urfan. You see the faqih use this a lot. Urfan, what is commonly regarded as? What is commonly regarded as? Another example. I'll take the questions afterwards, inshallah. Another example. When we talk about ornaments, zina, the Quran says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنْ. They must not show their ornaments. Of course, with regards to women, showing their ornaments to non-mahram men. وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنْ. We come to Islam. Oh Islam, what is your definition of zina? Do you consider red zina? Do you consider this type of jewelry zina? Do you consider makeup zina? Do you consider tattoo zina? Do you consider nail polish zina? He says, you go to common view, you go to urf. Whatever is regarded in urf as zina, people see it as a beautifier, as a form of ornament, then that is what zina is. Can urf or a'raf and different cultures and customs differ on this? Yes. In certain cities that are so conservative in Iraq, a color could be a form of zina. Whereas you go to other city, color is not considered zina, it's just a color. So this varies. But in most cultures, in most a'raf, yes, nail polish is indeed a form of zina. Otherwise, why would somebody put it on? So it's a beautifier. You see, so this subject is defined by whom? Urf, common view. The first subject was defined by whom? By Islam itself. The third is what we call the normal subject. Most of the subjects are normal subjects that are defined by me and you. Water, drinking, sleeping, smoking, vaping, laughing, writing, reading, everything else. All these subjects are normal subjects. Who's responsible for defining them? Me and you, because they're self-defined. They're very simple. Drinking water, Islam doesn't have to define that for me. Urf doesn't have to define that for me. It's clear, it's common sense. So how many types of subjects do we have so far? 3. One that is defined by Islam, one that is defined by common view, and one that is defined by itself. Everyone is capable of defining it. This is the second point. Let's go on to the third point after a loud salawat. What is the role of the jurist in this whole process? The marja. Because again, remember the question we started with. What is the question? Is it necessary for a marja to understand life in the West in order for them to be qualified to derive and to issue rulings for us living in the West? So what is his role in this whole process? He has two roles. Number one, he needs to derive the rulings from the Holy Quran and from the authentic ahadith. Derive what? The ruling. The subject or the ruling? The ruling. Wujub, hurma, karaha, istihbab, and the rest of the things we talked about. And his second role is to define the subjects that Islam is responsible for defining, which are not clear. Because the Islamic subjects, some of them are clear. The method of salah overall in general is clear. But the concept of kathratus safar, frequent traveling is a subject that is defined by Islam. But it's not clear. It's not like salah. Who's a frequent traveler? That's not something that me and you can say, oh, I know what a frequent traveler is, unless I refer to a jurist. And how does the jurist know? By referring to different narrations. And why do I say this is ambiguous and not clear? Because there are different riwayat that are conflicting on this matter. So which one do you go with? Is it 10 days a month? Is it 4 days a month? Is it this much? What is the criteria? It varies. So this is an unclear subject. Islam is responsible for defining, but it's not easily defined unless we resort to the jurist. So who's responsible for defining that subject? The jurist. But where is this subject taken from? The Holy Quran and the Ahadith. So both of the things that the jurist is responsible for, which are the rulings and that type of subject, are being derived from where? The Quran, and from where? The Ahadith. Does the faqih need to live in the West to understand the Quran and the Ahadith? No. That is his role. You say, but what about all these other subjects? You say, which subjects? For example, you say music, ornaments, other things. Again, are they subjects that Islam is responsible for, or common views responsible for? If you say common views responsible for, then go to common view. Marja is not responsible for identifying that. If it is an ordinary subject, you go and identify it. Marja is not responsible for coming here and going to the lab to see what is the percentage of alcohol that is in vanilla extract. That's not his business. He just tells you if the alcohol that you add to the food is less than 3%, it's fine. More than that, it's a problem. So does he have to now come and live in the West to understand how the food is made, and how this alcohol is being added and the percentage? He doesn't need to do this. You go to the experts in this field, they give you the definition, they give you the criteria, and you apply the ruling. So the faqih is responsible for the ruling, which is derived from the Quran and from the Ahadith. And the faqih is responsible for identifying or defining the subject that Islam is responsible for. Let me give you another example of these subjects that are vague. Ghiba, backbiting. What is the definition of backbiting? Fuqaha have different views on this. You can't say, oh, I know what backbiting is. It's just to talk bad about another person. No, that's not the definition of backbiting. There's a very concise definition. There is a conditions that are involved in that definition. There are exceptions to it. All these things are not easily defined by me and you. Who do we refer to? The faqih. Because this is something that Islam is responsible for defining, and it's not clear to us, then who's responsible for defining it? The faqih. Does faqih have to come and live here to understand the definition of ghiba? No. So therefore, when we understand the role of the jurist, the marji', and the role of the muqallid, the emulator, then the question is answered. The faqih does not need to live in the West or understand life in the West in order to issue rulings for Muslims living in the West. Whenever a new subject rises, they bring it to the table, they bring it to the faqih. They say, faqih, here's a white paper. There's something new that has been brought up in the United States. What is it? Or in the West, some new technology. This new technology is a life support. When somebody is about to, die, they restitute them and they put them on a life support, and this keeps them living. Can we remove that life support from that mu'min or that believer that is on that life support if the doctor says there's no hope that they'll come back to life because they're brain dead, but their heart's still pulping or still beating? Fuqaha would differ on this. His Eminence, for example, would say that you cannot remove that life support from that patient. You must keep it as long as the heart's still beating. Say, does the faqih now have to come to live in the West or understand life in the West in order to issue that? No, because the faqih says when a believer is still alive, you cannot take away their life. Simple as that. The nuances that are involved in this, he says, that's not my duty. If the expert, the doctor, has identified that this patient's heart stopped, that's it. They are dead, and they are dead. In fact, they say that mawdu' al-maut, the subject of death, is urfi. Urf is responsible for defining, not Islam. He says whatever urf regards, and he says urf, according to what he has identified, urf says that a maut, death, is not established unless the heart stops. Now some fuqaha differ. They say no, death is established or death occurs if the brain is fully dead, meaning there's not even 1% left or a possibility that it would come back to life. Anyhow, so there are three types of subjects: that which Islam is responsible for in the faqih on behalf of Islam when it comes to the ambiguous subjects, and then we have that which common view is responsible for, and that which is self-identifiable. Simple. And again, the answer to the question that we began with is based on this. The jurists, the maraja, do not need to understand the details of life in the West in order to be qualified to issue edicts. Because we hear this between time and time. Our maraja don't understand our life in the West. That is why the rulings that they issue are behind, they're not up to date, as if they have authority to change the rulings. Fuqaha do not have any authority to tamper with rulings. They go to the Quran, they go to the ahadith, they try their best to derive what they can derive. But they cannot use personal opinion in matters of religion. An example of a customary or of a ordinary subject I want to conclude with is significant harm. Islam says, and it's clear even without the faqih saying it, anything that causes significant harm you are not allowed to consume. Which means if someone knows that this food that they will eat has poison and that would take away their life, what is the ruling? Haram. What is the subject? Poisoned food. Who identifies whether the food is poisoned or not? The marja? No. Common view? No. You and me. But the question that is going to be asked right now, that I will ask, which relates to the martyrdom of our beloved Imam al-Jawad, peace be upon him, if it is haram to eat something or drink something poisoned, why would Imam al-Jawad drink that juice, that lemon juice that was given to him by al-Fadl? Why? You say, well, he didn't know. Oh, but I thought he knows ilmul ghaib. Our Imams alayhimus salam are given special knowledge by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from that knowledge, he knows what is in that juice. So then why did he drink it? It's clearly haram to consume that which can take away your life. This question has been raised with respect to our Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, our Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, and the rest of the Imam that were poisoned. Imam al-Hasan al-Mushtaba alayhi salam, and so on and so forth. How do we answer this question? There are different answers, but I'll choose the easiest of them and the simplest of them in the interest of time. Our Imams have two types of knowledge. Special knowledge that is bestowed to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Knowledge that is beyond the senses. And this knowledge they can only use in certain affairs, but not in the normal affairs. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. ثانيا غفر الله لكم. ثالثا على حب إمامنا الجواد بأعلى أصواتكم. اللهم صل على محمد. The two types of knowledge that our Imam alayhi salam have is that which is special knowledge, that which is given to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which others don't have. And this is, of course, not absolute. They don't share all the knowledge that Allah has. Allah has given them some portion of knowledge of ghaib that is beyond the senses. And then there is knowledge that we all have that they share with, which is the knowledge of senses. When you use your senses to see. Our Imams are not responsible or are not permitted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to use the ilmul ghaib, that special knowledge, in their normal affairs. This is one of the answers. They are only responsible for the regular type of knowledge that their senses detect. I'll give you an example. The commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, was giving knowledge by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi that you will be struck in the month of Ramadan. And perhaps he gave him the time, the 19th. So he had that knowledge. And even the person who will kill him, which is Abdul Rahman bin Muljam al-Muradi alayhi al-adab, and the commander of the faithful that night was ready for this. When he went to Masjid al-Kufa and he entered, he saw his killer. Why did he act as if this is not his killer? He knows that he will kill him. Why did he not say, you know what, I'll send Al-Hasan alayhi salam to pray today and I'll take a break. Or I'll take guards with me, and once I see this person, we can arrest him until Salah is done. Why didn't he do any of that? Because he's not permitted to act according to that special knowledge. So far, everything appears normal. Abdul Rahman is sleeping. Did he say, I want to kill Ali ibn Abi Talib? Did anybody hear him? No. But there is a very unique incident that is mentioned in this regard. Hijr ibn Adi, according to one of the riwayat, heard a conversation. Now pay attention to this point. A conversation between Abdul Rahman and somebody else. So he got the sense that they are planning to assassinate the commander of the faithful. So what did Hijr do? Hijr right away had to go inform the commander of the faithful. But Hijr went from one side and the commander of the faithful came from the other side. So they missed each other. Had Hijr found the commander of the faithful in the middle and told him, it would be the duty, it would be incumbent on the commander of the faithful to come right away and arrest Abdul Rahman bin Muljam. Because now he's acting according to a trustworthy figure, Hijr ibn Adi, who says, look, we have news that these people are trying to kill you. Now he has to act. But due to the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Hijr went from one side to tell the commander of the faithful, but the commander of the faithful took another side to come to the masjid. So they missed each other. Hijr reached the masjid, but he heard the call, تهدمت والله أركان الهدى. So you find that the A'immah alayhimus salam have that special knowledge given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they are not permitted to act according to it in their normal affairs, but rather act according to the senses and whatever their senses detect in whatever knowledge comes to them from normal means. And this is one of the answers, there are more answers, to why our beloved Imam Al-Jawad alayhi salam drank that juice on a very hot summer day when he was observing a mustahab fast. Al-Fadl brought this, she offered it, she placed it before him. He did not see her place poison in it, therefore he treated it as good, and there's no harm in drinking it at that point. He drank the juice, and as soon as he drank from that juice, he began to feel the pains, the pain of the poison. The enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have exerted so much effort to choose the worst of all poisons when they wanted to kill the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They won't use normal poison that the Imam would right away feel the effect of. our beloved Imam Al-Jawad alayhi salam, after drinking from that juice, he began to suffer the pains. One report says that al-Fadl kept him in a room. She locked that room and left. The Imam called upon her, Ya al-Fadl, bring me a drink of water, I am thirsty. The riwayah narration says she did not bring him any water. She left him suffering the pain, suffering the thirst, until the moment came where our beloved Imam directed his face towards the Qibla. He says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. After this, our beloved Imam began to sweat, his forehead began to sweat, he began to breathe the last of his breath, his soul departed his body. Aywa Imama wa Jawada. Our beloved Imam al-Jawad died and did not get the chance to drink a sip of water. This reminds you of the thirsty. Our beloved Gharib al-Hussein alayhi salam, he also asked for some water, but no one quenched his thirst. Rather, they threw the rocks at him, they threw the arrows at him, they threw all types of things at him until he was martyred. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, ya Madlum, ya Atshan, ya Gharib. Not only that they killed him thirsty, but they allowed the horses to trample on the body of Hussein, breaking the ribs of Abu Abdullah. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-ali al-azim. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين فرج عنا يا الله. Before we go to the Noha, I want to take the question from Brother Hamid, inshallah, and a couple of questions, and inshallah in 5 minutes I will give the microphone for our Noha Khan, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Haj Hamid right there had a question. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Thanks for taking my question. You partly answered it, but about the urf or the common view, as you explained, it changes, right? So it not only changes from a culture to a culture,
from time to time,
in time to time as well.
Ahsan.
So that subtlety is understood and it's allowed, right?
Ahsant. So for example, I'll give you a very simple example. We have gambling instruments that are known to be used for gambling. Now leave chess to the side, because a lot of our ulama say chess is haram in all times. Leave that to the side. Other gambling instruments, are they haram at all times? The fuqaha say if by common view it is no longer considered a gambling instrument. At one point it used to be a gambling instrument, but now no one uses it for gambling. Therefore, it is no longer a gambling instrument, and therefore one can play with it without any betting and without any money. But at that point, who defines whether it is a gambling instrument or not? Urf, common view. Ahsant.
Thank you. And the point about the imams, the shubha that you made, that you explained, I think that's a powerful one too, because a lot of our other brothers, they take this, that if they knew, why did they take it, And then the explanation that you did, that they're not allowed to use that special knowledge. I think it goes into their highest status, and that they have to be selected by God, otherwise common person would take advantage of that knowledge, right? Well,
Ahsan.
I'm going to be killed, so why shouldn't I use this land?
Ahsant. And at
Yeah,
that point, they're
that's,
not being subject to the normal laws that govern the universe
Yes.
that other peoples are subject to. Ahsant.
Yeah,
Brother
thank
Sadiq Dato, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
One common argument that we sometimes hear is we understand that the marja doesn't necessarily have to be in the West to come up with the ruling, but sometimes they may not appreciate the challenges of implementing that rule when living in the West. So how would we respond to that? So for example, we understand the ruling, but does the marja really understand how difficult it is to implement that perhaps in the West? And what would be the response to that?
Ahsantum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ittaqullaha mastata'tum. O you who believe, be pious of Allah as much as you can. The hadith says that there will be a time where holding on to your faith is like holding a coal in your hand. So these challenges are there, but they vary from time to time. The fact that we live in the West, sometimes it is a choice we make, and we can change that choice, and therefore at that point we are responsible for changing that choice. But sometimes it's not a choice. It's something that we are almost forced to be in. There's no other place that can allow us in. Our life would be very difficult, and so on and so forth. We have our reasons, but if you have a valid reason to be there, then the faqih says, I understand these challenges, but we have to understand that the faqih also has challenges. The challenges is that he cannot change these laws to make our life easy because he's not authorized to. This goes back to the time of ghaiba. Ghaibatul Imam, the tax for ghaiba is that we have to go through so much challenges, and the jurist would say, you know what, we don't have another alternative. But if you reach a point where a specific ruling is unbearable between you and Allah, then between you and Allah you have to make that call. That's why they use the qaida of haraj. وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ haraj. A lot of the rulings the faqih would answer, and he says, but if this entails unbearable hardship, then it is permissible. Abortion, right, amounts to murder, right? It's one of the most heinous crimes. Yet the faqih says, if it is before the ensoulment, before the ruh enters into the fetus, if the mother will face unbearable hardship by keeping it, then it is permissible. But who defines unbearable hardship? She has to. He's not going to go and say, yeah, I think you should abort the child. So meaning the faqih understands that there are challenges, but his hands are tied. He can't bring us to live near him where there is maybe less challenges, and he can't change the laws. So what does he do? He says, استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. Any other questions, or we should conclude? Conclude inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein.
अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा खैर बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं कैसा है ये चराग़ कैसा है ये चराग़ दिल डूबे जा रहे हैं क्या शाम आ गया है अम्मा फिजा खैर बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ नेज़े पे जितने सर है ایک سر ہے ان میں ایسا، آنکھیں ہیں بند اس کی، اور خاک پر ہے گرتا۔ عباس کا یہ سر ہے، ہائے عباس کا یہ سر ہے، تیور بتا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے۔ اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں۔ اماں فضا خیر بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے۔ ماں کی گودیوں سے لپٹے ہوئے ہیں بچے، ہے ہاتھ رسیوں میں ماں کے ایسے جھگڑے، بچے جو گر رہے ہیں وہ مرتے جا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے۔ اماں فضا خیر بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں۔ اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، ہونے لگی اذانیں کیسے سروں کو ڈھانپے، بازو بندھے ہوئے ہیں خون رو رہی ہے آنکھیں، آنکھوں کے خون سے راستے خون میں نہا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے۔ اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں۔ اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر ہے لوگ کس طرح کے ہم سے دعا کرائے، اے قیدیو دعا دو یہ دن نہ ہم پہ آئے، لے کر دعائیں ہم سے دل بھی دکھا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے۔ اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں۔ اماں فضا خیر بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر اتنا چلے ہیں پیدل کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی، ہائے اتنا چلے ہیں پیدل کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی، تھک جاتی چلتے چلتے، ہائے چلتی اگر زمین بھی، پیروں کے آبلے بھی آنسو بہا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے۔ اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں۔ اماں فضا خیر بتا دے مجھ کو، پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں۔ کیسا ہے یہ چراغ، کیسا ہے یہ چراغ، دل ڈوبے جا رہے ہیں، کیا شام آ گیا ہے۔ اماں फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा खैर बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं रहमल्लाहु मन क़रा अल-फ़ातिहा
Ziyarah of our beloved Imam Al-Jawad alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. وعجل فرجهم يا كريم. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام على الحسن المجتبى وعلى الحسين الشهيد بكربلاء وعلى التسعة المعصومين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف القائم المهدي. السلام عليك يا ولي الله، السلام عليك يا حجة الله، السلام عليك يا نور الله في ظلمات الأرض، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك وعلى آبائك، السلام عليك وعلى أبنائك، السلام عليك وعلى أوليائك. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وتلوت الكتاب حق تلاوته وجاهدت في الله حق جهاده وصبرت على الأذى في جنبه حتى أتاك اليقين. أتيتك زائرا عارفا بحقك مواليا لأوليائك معاديا لأعدائك فاشفع لي عند ربك. For the honor of Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt, for all of your marhumin and marhumat, and for the hastening of the reappearance of our beloved Imam, and for the qada of all of our hawa'id inshaAllah, and shifa of all of our marda, let us recite Surah Al-Fatiha along with a loud salawat.